Palantir is essentially part of a vast global conspiracy to deprive Americans, specifically American patriots, of their rights, and that is somehow supposed to benefit Israel. This is usually not explained to me, but I'm just supposed to understand that that is the implication. Fair enough. And this is often used recently in the last year or so, even leading up to 2024, specifically to attack J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance has a connection to Peter Thiel, by extension Palantir. And again, I think this is a lot of just people being out of positions of power and looking at when people are involved or in proximity to power, seeing how these networks sort of form, and they see that these are obviously publicly available networks. Oh, this guy met this guy, he's friends with this guy, he worked for this guy's company, and they see that and they just assume nefarious intent, again, because for their entire lives they have been essentially exploited and harmed by these kinds of institutions, Yale Law School, what have you, these sorts of credentializing areas. So the relationship with J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel, that goes back to 2011. J.D. Vance was at Yale Law School. He attended a talk that was being given by Peter Thiel where Thiel was talking about, elite betrayal, stagnation in tech, all that stuff. And Vance saw it, thought it was awesome, thought that Peter Thiel was a super smart guy. And so they would end up developing this kind of mentor-mentee relationship, which, is similar to the story with Blake Masters. Blake Masters took, I guess, exceptionally detailed notes in a class that Thiel was giving when he was doing a tour of service at Stanford. Presented that to Thiel. They would end up writing a book together based on the notes that Blake Masters took on this course from Peter Thiel. That's 0 to 1. It's actually a great book. And then, Blake Masters, of course, has been involved in right-wing politics. He was running for Senate in Arizona. At the same time, J.D. Vance was running for Senate in Ohio. Vance would end up winning that race. Thiel put up $15 million for that to a super PAC in Ohio, which I think broke some kind of record. He would sort of integrate Vance into his, network with guys like David Sachs. He would introduce Trump to J.D. Vance, try to mend that relationship because Vance had made some anti-Trump comments, as he was sort of getting his sea legs in right-wing politics. And so that was kind of and then too, Vance had a job at Thiel's venture capital firm or something, Minthril something. I don't know. The point is that these words, Silicon Valley and venture capital, we hear these words and these are supposed to be buzzwords or scare words that make us go this must be freaking bad. On paper, dude, I don't know. It strikes me as a very sort of typical mentor-mentee kind of relationship, which again, if you are out of power and you are only viewing these things from the outside, you see that, and because everything your entire life institutionally has been working against you, trying to harm you, you see that and you can assume that it must be some kind of nefarious intent. Okay, maybe it's easy to say that as this is developing 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. Look at the fruits of this though. J.D. Vance is a senator in Ohio. J.D. Vance now is the vice president of the United States. He's doing fantastic work. Things are going very well for us. Due in large part to J.D. Vance, who Peter Thiel wanted J.D. Vance to be the president, or excuse me, to be the vice president, but obviously probably the president too. Why would he not want that? That's his guy, and that's expected to happen come 2028. But Charlie Kirk also wanted that. Charlie Kirk was thinking in 12-year timelines, wanted J.D. Vance to be the vice president, lobbied Donald Trump to make that decision for Vance to be the vice president. This seems to be going well, and that is why this is a talking point on the right wing. Again, being something that's absorbed from the left wing, freaking out about Thiel, Palantir, what have you. It's because ultimately they're trying to harm J.D. Vance. They're really banking on trying to do as much to impede the Trump administration now as they can. Then in 2028, we'll kneecap Vance by turning some of the base against him by talking about Silicon Valley and big tech and Palantir, things of that nature, surveillance, big tech, whatever, dude. So that is why this is all happening, and we all have to be concerned about this stuff. But anyway, what is Palantir in the first place? This is a tech company that was founded in 2003 by Nathan Getting, Stephen Cohen, Alex Karp, Joe Lonsdale, and Peter Thiel. And if you've read your Tolkien, you should already be aware of the origins of the company's name. Peter Thiel is a big Tolkien guy. The Lord of the Rings, of course, you have the Palantiri. These are spherical seeing stones used for telepathic communication and remote viewing, things of that nature. And this is, of course, going to activate certain ethnic superstitions. Ay Dios mío. So I understand maybe he wasn't doing himself any favors there. But while the technology might be pretty effective, which I've never used it, so I really couldn't tell you. I don't really have a contract going on with Palantir, despite what people will assume because we are talking about Palantir in a way that's not just repeating leftist talking points and freaking out for no reason. I'm going to have to disappoint you a little bit by telling you that this does not actually give you telepathic powers. Instead, what it actually offers is a little bit more mundane, a little bit less romantic. It's just software platforms that allow clients to make sense of pre-existing data. So when you put it that way, it doesn't sound exactly suspicious, but given that its clients include maybe some suspicious figures, you've got intelligence agencies, militaries, some of the world's largest corporations, okay, yeah, it's pretty clear that Palantir, whatever it does, is operating at the highest levels of society. You know, much of the U.S. government is running on Palantir software. Maybe we should pay a little bit more attention to that. Fair enough. What's noteworthy, however, with the Palantir stuff is that the origin lies not on the right, but on the left, literally exclusively. And amusingly, it is the fact that several of Palantir's founders are outspokenly right-wing that the anti-Palantir narratives were spread in the first place. This was not from some kind of like principled opposition to whatever we're talking. It is literally just because Palantir is run by guys who are sympathetic and enthusiastic about right-wing ideas. There was a 2017 article in The Intercept, which is obviously a far-left outlet, which still kind of can I guess you'd say, inform our experience with this. It serves as a foundation for how much of this is actually playing out. It was titled, How Peter Thiel's Palantir Helped the NSA Spy on the Whole World. And the piece begins by lamenting the fact that Donald Trump had assumed control of, quote, the most powerful machine for spying ever devised. Not kidding. Literally, that is the opening sentence in the article. That alone kind of tells you what you need to know about the whole like concern with Palantir, I think. The article claims that Palantir has worked for years to boost the global dragnet of the NSA and its international partners and was in fact co-created with American spies. That sounds pretty spooky to me. But when describing what Palantir software actually does, they don't really say anything new. They say Palantir has long sought to sell governments an unmatched power to sift and exploit information of any kind. That is what they said. Okay, let's unpack that for a second. Sift and exploit information of any kind. What does that mean? Okay, dig a little bit deeper, find out it's actually exactly what Palantir advertises itself as doing on their website. You purchase their software, and then you put your data into that software, and it allows you to organize that data and then analyze your data. You don't have to send your data to Palantir unless you want to, which I'm assuming most of its clients don't. Some probably do. All it does is give you the ability to make sense of your own data. Now, what you do with your data could be nefarious, but Palantir doesn't have to know that. And the service it appears to provide doesn't even necessitate nefarious activity any more than any other similar software services would, which again, we have no problem with those, but only this for whatever reason. Okay, dude. Just look at it this way. Imagine you had an enormous collection of, I don't know, baseball cards, right? They're disorganized. They're taking up a bunch of space in your garage, your basement. You don't know what to do with all these baseball cards, which is a hobby I've decided that you have. But I then sell you a system that you can put your cards into. It organizes them, and then it gives you some kind of better sense of what you have. It's a crude analogy. That is sort of what's going on here. That's going to help you understand what Palantir actually does. You know, the biggest misconception appears to be that Palantir, like, takes all of its clients' data, that if like a federal agency uses Palantir software, it's going to send your data directly to, you know, Palantir, which is then uploading into the Mossad central database or whatever. Look, if Palantir was like literally stealing its clients' data, that would obviously be a huge crime and a big problem. I don't support that. Once it came to light, which it probably would, because again, all of these people seem to have a unique problem with Palantir, it would be done. The executives would be sent to prison. If that's happening, there's no evidence for it. And by the way, if the federal government wanted to send your data to Mossad, which for the record, you know, I really don't think that's what's going on, it doesn't need Palantir to do that. It would just simply do that. It has been doing that. The existence of a company, again, with expressly right-wing sympathies is not going to stop that from happening, or not going to cause that to happen in a capacity that it's not already. Perhaps the system does view that to be an impediment to that, again, because these are guys that are patriot aligned more so than your typical Silicon Valley cluster of guys, right? But the article continues. It says, Palantir's impressive data mining abilities are well documented, but so too is the potential for misuse. Palantir software is designed to make it easy to sift through piles of information that would be completely impossible to sift through were it not for their freaking evil software. But the human driving the computer is still responsible for making judgments, good or bad. So this is amusing because it's literally giving up the whole thing. It's admitting that Palantir is not some like inherently evil freaking bad guy. It's just depending on how it's used. And you might be tempted to say, well, you know, Palantir built something that could be used for freaking evil. Yeah, everybody else could also do that like they have been already, except they're doing it for left-wing causes. They're not building software that ICE is using to deport people. Every technology does that. Cars can be used to drive your kids to school. Okay, give a car to an inbred jihadi descended from the mountains of Afghanistan, throw him into downtown Paris. Let me know how that car is going to be used. Let me know how that van is going to be used. It's going to be used to mow down white people celebrating Christmas. It applies to literally every technology, guns, knives, the internet, everything. Virtually every form of technology comes with that, right? A great Canadian philosopher once famously said, all technologies merely are extensions of ourselves. You could say that they amplify the characteristics of their hosts, right? It's just how it is. So, okay, given that man has free will, he can use his own faculties for good or evil. Wouldn't it then make sense that technology would be the same? We know this. Now, I will admit some technologies are obviously more prone to abuse than others. I don't really trust the average American in the big 2-6 to responsibly handle something like a nuclear weapon. Libertarians still in the audience, which I don't know why you would be after the last episode. I basically told you to leave. I told you to heck off. Sorry, Doyle went full statist again by not having TAC nukes in civilian possession. Frankly, I'm not even convinced the average American can handle like internet access in the big 2-6. I am jaded in my old age, but still, I'm not convinced that like a software suite that analyzes data has exactly the same potential for destruction as something like, I don't know, an atomic bomb or something. And I would wager there are probably still quite a few other tech companies offering similar services, but the only difference is they are anti-patriot, right? That's the whole problem. And that's the reason why there's so much fear-mongering about Palantir. Palantir, unlike the others, is actually run by pro-Trump MAGA patriots who are willing to align themselves with patriot interests. And for the record, that doesn't mean that Palantir can do no wrong. I'm not saying that. It doesn't mean that Palantir is like above reproach. Just because a company is run by Trump supporters does not mean that it gets a pass. I'm not saying that. Doesn't mean that it just has license to do bad stuff, unethical stuff, stuff against our interests. I'm not saying that. But still, no one has ever been able to present a case to me as to why I'm supposed to be worried about this. All they do is just say Palantir, Thiel, Silicon Valley, network, venture capital. I know that this is culturally insensitive. I'm an Anglo-Saxon. I need you to elaborate. I need you to further convince me. You cannot just simply like throw these words at me and activate my superstitions. And Dios mío, like this is not going to work. You have to. Where's Stefan Molyneux? Not an argument. You can't just be in my reply saying like, oh, Palantir, they're going to steal your data, Holmes. They're going to send it to Israel, Vato. Like, I do not find that to be convincing. You must further substantiate.